Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sash Star. It's a Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV, and I'd like to start the show. Um, First of all, to have update on what's happening to in Ukraine and elsewhere. The situation is that there are fights on Ukraine heating up. Russians are trying definitely to break through Ukrainian defensive lines. I think that a lot of it has to do with the idea to have a decisive breakthrough prior to election in Russia on March 27th, when Putin will be again declared president for next 6, maybe 12 years, maybe forever. And of course, they're all trying to do that as well. Another thing is overall situation in the world is now getting us closer and closer to the Third World War. It's not just Ukraine and Israel now in fourth month since October 7th massacre. And then there are a lot of problems elsewhere. For example, the recent bombardment in Houthis. And let me stop for a second here. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Hey, Sasha, glad to be here.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't notice that.
Oh, that's okay. Hey, I'm easygoing.
Yeah, Jonathan, you see what I'm discussing now. The situation is getting closer and closer to the Third World War. There's just too many hot points already there. Fighting is going on, and very different situations. I'm not trying to see that they're all the same. Far from it. They're obviously not all the same. Each one situation is very, very different. But in all this, you see North against global South. It's everywhere. That's uniting.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. There are enough parallels between this situation currently in the 21st century and the situation that was emerging in the late 20s and early 30s prior to the full-blown development of the Second World War. I mean, you could see, Japan was already engaging in aggression in China and Southeast Asia even prior to its strike on Pearl Harbor. But and other elements, and there was aggressive diplomatic maneuvering going on Nazi Germany's part, and you had the buildup in the 1930s. You could see any intelligent, well-informed observer at the time could see the Second World War coming. And now, as we are in the 21st century, people with a sense of history or who study historical parallels can see that, yes, there are a number of very provocative factors that are combining to make this a very volatile world situation. If we were to look at the situation in Ukraine, and there is increasing unity among the members of NATO in support of Ukraine, and a series of bilateral agreements between NATO members and Ukraine, not necessarily a unified declaration on NATO's part, although they're awfully close to that. And the United States, however slow you might criticize its political process, it appears, coming around to committing itself to some form of support for Ukraine in order to prevent it from being defeated by Russia and rewarding Russia for its aggression. So, is World War III possible? Oh, certainly, most certainly. We've given the wrong set of occurrences, and with the danger of Putin taking the attitude of Samson in the temple. He's chained to the pillars, and he knows he's about to die, and Putin decides, let me die with my enemies, poof, and just unleash World War III with his nuclear arsenal. And by the way, if you don't think that's a possibility, remember that during the Cold War, when I was analyzing Russian perceptions of U.S. strategy, I also saw a number of constant discussions in Russian political journals where they discuss the so-called crisis of capitalism. Now, this is a very interesting argument. They claim that as the socialist revolution continued to gain successes in the world, eventually the capitalist leadership, particularly the United States, would become so desperate to reverse the situation that they would unleash a nuclear strike, a desperate lashing out in order to try and reverse the successes of the socialist revolution. Well, the socialist revolution worldwide turned out to be a mirage, and the Soviet Union collapsed from its own internal contradictions, thanks to in part to the US's containment strategy. But here now we have, with the Russians threatening to unleash their nuclear arsenal, we are seeing, in effect, the Russians projecting their own real political attitudes. They are acting as if they are in a crisis of socialism. It's sort of the reverse argument. They are mirror imaging, projecting their own views onto the world, and assuming that the world would react in the same way that they would in a similar situation. So I find this very interesting and very dangerous, which is why again, sorry if I sound like a broken record, which is an analogy that most people would not understand today. They don't even know what a record player is, but that's okay. What we're looking at is the U.S. and NATO should be seriously, if they are not already doing so, committing to constructing a global ballistic missile defense system, which already shows promise at the theater level, but being able to do so by bolstering the Space Force and constructing a system that can intercept ballistic missiles from Earth orbit and be able to catch them in their boost phase, which effectively neutralizes the nuclear arsenals of our adversaries. And that's my take on it so far.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to mention that when you compare Putin to Samson, what I noticed is, remember, Samson regained his powers, not only thanks to God, but also, and maybe that's the way it was done, his hair started to grow back. Remember?
And Samson, yes, his hair was starting to grow back. He was repenting of his sin.
And I didn't notice that Putin's hair started to grow back. I didn't know.
This is ominous. He could be ready to pull down those pillars of the temple at any moment. Place Samson in the temple.
Time to time, I'm looking at Russian narratives about the world situation, the current wars, and so on. 99% of it is garbage, but sometimes 1% may be justified. At least one thing, what they're saying, that the Yalta-Potsdam agreements, they're all crushed. And they are non-existing anymore. There are different players, there are different setups, there are different distribution of powers in the world, and so on. So that system is no longer good. And because there is no other system in place, so therefore there are no rules. Anybody can attack anybody. And if you look into real politics, people like Professor John Mearsheimer, he's saying that I read his article about liberalism and real politics, where he's saying that liberalism is essentially old school when it's saying that all the liberal powers, they love each other and they work together and they do certain things and so on. But the real politics completely crushes this argument, because the powers which are not part of a liberal system, they don't care about the liberal setups and the values or anything. They will just do whatever their sheer power would allow them to do. So it's a question not of whether it's a liberal beliefs or totalitarian beliefs or autocratic beliefs. It's a question of power. It's so simple, though. It makes everything so simple. Okay, here is one country which is more powerful than another country. Okay, here is a war. The more powerful country wins. If you take Argentina versus England, the Falkland War, for example, that's exactly what happened. One country disagreed with another country. They couldn't figure out their differences and sort it out. So there's a war, one side won, another one lost. The end of story, done, deal. So same thing should have happened with Russia and Ukraine. Russia is so much more powerful and bigger and stronger. And according to Professor Mersheimer himself, Russia, the war shouldn't have even started. It's the same situation like when Ireland started the war against Soviet Union, and Brezhnev called the Irish Prime Minister and asked, "How many tanks do you have?" And he said, "We have 54 tanks." Brezhnev says, "We have 15,000 tanks. How many warplanes do you have?" And he says, "We have 65 warplanes." Brezhnev says, "We have 25,000 warplanes." So there was a pause, and then he says, "Okay, the war is cancelled." Okay, so it should have happened maybe something similar to Ukraine and Russia. So Russia would make a call and say, "Okay, you here, we want to do this and that." Ukraine says, "Prove it. Prove it. You're much stronger and bigger and smarter and so on. Prove it." It's like in a poker game. You're saying,
They called him. He didn't have the cards.
I have a fantastic card. You have to give up.
Says, we got a better hand.
Put them on the table. And Putin so far is not doing that brilliantly with his cards. So all these conflicts have very interesting, unique history. Look at the Houthis now; they are against all the might of United States and UK and probably 10 other countries altogether, and they have audacity to have an argument, and not just argument like in diplomatic terms, but in fact they are fighting U.S. and other powers. And what do you think? Is it a religious belief in their right, or is there so much committed to supporting Hezbollah and Hamas they don't care how many people they will lose and what are the consequences of that war, if you wish? What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, to the extent that that Hamas believes that if they are engaged in a holy war, in which if they die, they are guaranteed a free ticket into heaven. To that extent, if they believe that strongly, that to die in a holy war is an instant ticket into heaven, into paradise, then it forces Israel, in order to preserve its own survival, into a situation even more stark than Rome versus Carthage in the Punic Wars. I mean, that Roman senator used to say at the end of every speech, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. And the Romans were dead serious about that. And when they won in the Punic Wars, Carthage was eliminated as a nation state. And the Romans saw to that. And here, for Israel is confronted with an opponent that has declared to all the Arab peoples, essentially, that the ultimate goal is the elimination of Israel, for the elimination of not just of Israel, the elimination of the Jews. I mean, how much more stark of a political objective can you have? And any outside observer looking at this conflict would agree that Israel, in its own interest of national survival, they are not simply willing to lay down their arms and die. They are going to fight and preserve their existence. And if it means that inflicting such devastating casualties on Hamas, to the extent that virtually they can dictate a peace, and they may well be, with sufficient backing, be able to argue for the deportation of the remaining Palestinian peoples to various countries and simply depopulate that disputed area and have Israel occupy it, and just simply expand Israeli territory and consolidate it. But to try to do so, and Israel's challenge will be to try to do so in such a manner that they cannot be effectively painted as a modern day version of Nazi Germany conducting its own Holocaust, which is what its opponents will try to do. So it's a diplomatic challenge for Israel. It's not so much of a military challenge, because the military forces are very much in Israel's favor, and they are systematically destroying Hamas infrastructure. So it's a matter of patience, perseverance, and being willing to ignore the propaganda narrative that is going on.
Jonathan, but you would agree that the history is written by winners.
Correct.
What Americans and England atrocities that they created in Germany during the war, the bombardment of Dresden, Hamburg, the Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan, they all could be qualified as a genocide and war atrocities and crimes. And you can scream as much as you want, but it's not Germany and Japan who written history. It was
Right,
United
and
States.
the way we write it, we simply we provided Japan with an ultimatum. Truman provided Japan with an ultimatum. If they will not, they can expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never before been seen on this earth. And he was not exaggerating.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a fact. And now you can see that essentially what Hamas did, so they relied on the fact, of course, they could not defeat Israel in the open warfare. So they relied that when Israel will try to get back at them sooner or later, they will do the propaganda in United Nations and elsewhere in the social media and whatever, Israel is aggressor. They're ruining their infrastructure, killing citizens of Gaza, or so on. But you see, and that worked to a certain extent, I must agree. And on the other hand, Israel has no choice, because if Hamas wanted to stop the atrocities, if they would release all the hostages instantly and they would give up their top commanders and so on, we're talking about maybe a handful of people, and then all the war essentially would be over. And Israel mentioned several times that all they care is to free the hostages and have Hamas essentially give up. They're not calling that a capitulation as it was the case in the Second World War, but at least so for foreseeable future, there will be no more threats from Hamas and from Gaza, therefore. And for some reason, as much as there is a talk that that in Gaza Palestinians is one thing and Hamas is a different thing, and this is Hamas who did the atrocities, the Palestinians people didn't do that. I'm not buying that at all, because the Palestinian people who are not part of Hamas, they participated in the invasion of October 7th, and they were bringing the hostages back to Gaza. They were dancing on the street of Gaza and singing and torturing the Holocaust survivors, 84 years old women. So I'm not really buying that. I'm not saying that all of them have to be killed for doing that. It's going into collective responsibility concept, but at least there has to be some so to say, efforts on the part of Hamas, Palestinians, or both, to admit at least that this was unacceptable. Here are your hostages. Okay, we have 3, 5, 10 commanders of Hamas who were planning that event, and we think that they're guilty that happened. And obviously, they have to denounce their plan, Palestine from the river to the sea, with the elimination of Israel and Jews. They have to stop that garbage once and for all. And neither of that is happening. So they don't give Israel any chance to stop the atrocities, what they're doing right now. But they have to do it, same thing as what Englishmen and Americans did in Second World War. They had to defeat Germany and then Japan once and for all. And then they could create some kind of a peaceful coexistence. And as a matter of fact, it's now a considerable amount of time. We are talking about, 80 years, that there is no aggression from either Japan or Germany. So, in fact, the complete defeat of one side created the most peaceful conditions. Same thing, in my opinion, in Israel and Gaza.
And that is the counter model, and then that is the countering model that Israel could offer or present. Is look at the history of the Second World War. We're confronted with a state that desired to see us cease to exist. We are not going to accept that. We are going to eliminate them as an effective political entity, and then they will be, if necessary, as much as possible, be restructured and re-educated, if necessary, to the point where they are no longer they will be occupied as long as they are a threat. And and that will be the case. That's the model that Israel should follow. And they should be using a counter propaganda campaign, if you will, to counter the narrative that Hamas is trying to portray in the nations of the world, that somehow Israel is conducting its own Holocaust operation. No, not in the least. They should not accept that.
And if Israel will be successful in this war, I hope that it will happen, and rather sooner than later. And all this cry about impoverished Palestinians, which are the poorest people in the world, or so on. Look at I saw the pictures of the tunnels, what they built. It's several billion dollars infrastructure. It's similar to subway system in United States or England or anywhere. That's how well it was built. So people, the Palestinians, they're scrambling for a piece of bread, and then they have multi-billion dollars tunnels, which are used only for war against Israel. There's no other use for this structure. This is a pathetic situation, but there is what it is, and Israel has to demolish this horrible infrastructure. And if some Arab countries would like to help Palestinians, maybe take some of them over to their countries. Unfortunately, it never happened. The last 75 years, there were constant wars on and off between Israel and Arab countries. No Arab countries wanted to take Palestinians. I think that one of the main reasons probably is that they wanted to have Palestinians as the force which will bother Israel from time to time, with all kind of kamikaze-style attacks, atrocities.
Yeah, because obviously once the Palestinians are removed as an effective entity, then Israel has total consolidation, additional territory, and is able to will be able to prosper even more economically, and would also be able to reinforce its military preparedness. As if it wasn't enough already, they would become even more dominant of a military power, and they would be Israel would be striving to strengthen contacts with the members of NATO. It would not be even more so than they are now.
So you think from the point of the perception being everything, and if the world South will see they're defeated in Israel-Gaza conflict, and in Houthis, which probably will be over very soon. I don't think that 2-3 attacks like what we have last night. I don't think that more is needed there. And China then will become very, very careful in their posture against Taiwan. Russia is going to go forever in Ukraine is a war of attrition, but I think that war of attrition is much more unbearable for Russians than Ukrainians, in spite of the fact that there are many more Russians available and they have more probably.
Sasha, you'll notice that I've been looking at various reports in recent days, and the Ukrainians are gaining increasing successes, tactical successes that are significant both in the air and on the ground, and against that supply link that has been degraded even further. They blew up that bridge that the Russians have been working on for months, and that was a major setback. And these cumulative tactical defeats, I project, are going to eventually result in it's going to catch people by surprise, but effectively, the Ukrainians will have effectively severed the operational logistical and reinforcement link between Russia and Crimea. Once that occurs, Crimea falls into Ukrainian hands. With a commitment, with the Ukrainians will be able to commit their strategic reserve, which they've been holding back for such a purpose, I'm sure, and commit that, take over the Crimea, and then the Russians will be confronted with the loss of Crimea, which they won't be able to disguise, and the Ukrainians will have a much simpler problem on defense. They'll have freed up Crimea and gain that as a base of operations. They will also be able to reconstitute, be able to redistribute their forces to reinforce their positions in the east, and be able to confront the Russians with an even greater problem. And once the Ukrainians are able to gain air superiority, which the infusion of various types of ballistic missile defense, air defense, and higher quality aircraft that they'll finally be able to integrate into their air force and be able to change the balance of power in the air to where the Ukrainians have effective air superiority over the eastern battlefield. Then you will see a much different strategic situation in which the Russians will at last be compelled to accept a ceasefire which gets them out of Ukraine. And they may at that point decide to cut their losses and say, okay. And Putin will, of course, in his usual fashion, declare victory in his special military operation and get his forces back to the Russian side of the border.
So then, if all that happening, then the West could ask Russia and Putin, saying that, okay, so you are not happy with the Yalta-Potsdam arrangement anymore. Okay, so we are ready to make adjustments or make a new arrangements. And under new arrangement, you will be much worse than in the Yalta-Potsdam arrangement.
You will wish that you had never started this conflict.
Absolutely, because at that time you were one of the winners of Second World War, and as such you had a lot of advantages that normally you would never get, but you got it. And now, who you are? You are one of the winners. Winners at what? Where are your winners? Even your chess players are no longer the best in the world. Your ballet is no longer the best in the world. So what you are, who you are, what do you want really?
You're a third world country with nuclear weapons.
That's right.
And if we get that if we get that global ballistic missile defense system in place and effectively operating, you'll be just a third world country. Period.
Yeah, with some oil, and if the oil will go down in price, which may happen anyway.
Which there are signs that the American oil industry, and they are trying to pump oil to the maximum, and they're basically saying to the climate change people, climate change be damned. We don't believe you. We're going to produce oil, and so anyway, that's a whole separate story.
Yeah, it's a separate story. Canada is also producing oil, and climate in Canada is getting warmer and warmer each year.
Well, for them that's good. For you people, for you. It's good that it's getting warmer. It's too damn cold up there.
I love it. It's winter, and so far there was 0, +2, +5, not even minus yet. We'll see. There's still few more weeks left, but so far it's doing really well. Listen, Jonathan, I thank you so much for today's program, and we'll have a good weekend. It's Martin Luther King.
And I'm expecting, Sasha, we should be watching in the coming weeks, watching these tactical developments very carefully, both in the air, in the Black Sea, and against the Ukrainian, cheering on the Ukrainians' efforts to cut that reinforcement link, which people notice that analysts in the West now are starting to pay more and more attention to that logistics link.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Oh my goodness, the Ukrainians have a game changer here.
Yeah, what can I say? On one of the programs I spoke to the fact, when you are talking about Ukraine, you must divide between Ukrainian armed forces, which are heroic, second to none. You have to think about Ukrainian people, which are also heroic and which are doing their best during this very, very difficult times. And you have to look at the government, which desires to have a better, and hopefully it will.
It can always improve. All governments can improve.
Absolutely. That's right. Totally agree with you. The government is a government. It's a necessary evil in every country. Okay.
It's what theologian Martin Luther referred to as the kingdom of the left hand, referring to earthly government, the kingdom of the left hand, as compared to the kingdom of God, the heavenly kingdom, the kingdom in which all Christians reside. That's the kingdom of the right hand.
Yeah.
But so right now, while we're living in this world, we're in the kingdom of the left hand.
A lot of it, yeah. Okay, with that, I'm looking forward to see you on Tuesday, same place, same time, and have all the best to all our listeners. And Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.